I found out on a Tuesday. Not because she told me, because I pulled the mail out of the box and saw the official government envelope addressed to Colonel Heather Calloway, with my daughter's name printed on the return label from the Vital Records office. My hands were already shaking when I opened it. I don't know why I opened it. It was addressed to her, but something in my gut moved before my brain could stop me, some animal instinct that had been whispering for weeks that something was wrong, and I tore the envelope open right there in the driveway, standing in the November cold with the engine of my truck still ticking behind me. It was an amended birth certificate. Emma Rose Calloway. Born March 14th. Mother, Colonel Heather Diane Calloway. Father, not listed. I read it 3 times. My name, Jack Calloway, was gone. Not wrong. Not misspelled. Gone. Deliberately, legally, officially erased. I stood in that driveway for 4 minutes. I know because I checked my watch afterward, the way you do when your brain is searching for anything familiar to hold onto. For minutes of cold November air and the sound of the neighbor's dog barking 2 houses down. Emma was inside. I could see the light on in her bedroom window, the little pink curtain she'd picked herself at 6 years old, now 8 years old, sleeping in there without any idea that her father had just been unmade on paper. What Heather did not know, what she could not have imagined, was that in less than 60 days, I would be sitting across from a congressional subcommittee liaison who would hand me a folder confirming that Colonel Heather Calloway's entire military career, every promotion, every assignment, every medal with a story attached to it, had been built on a foundation I owned. And I was going to tell you exactly how I made that happen. I went inside. I put the certificate in my coat pocket. I kissed Emma on the forehead. She didn't wake up, and I stood in the hallway outside her door for a long time listening to her breathe. There was something I still didn't know. Something that, when I found it, would make everything 10 times worse than what I was already holding in my pocket. I just didn't know it yet. Heather and I met 17 years ago at Fort Bragg. I was a contractor, civilian, brought in to consult on communications infrastructure for a new rapid deployment unit they were standing up. She was a first lieutenant then, sharp and quick and the kind of woman who made every room feel like it was waiting for her opinion. I fell hard. I fell the way men fall when they haven't expected it, completely, and without a good plan for the landing. We married 11 months after we met. Fast. Her commanding officer gave a toast at the reception and called Heather a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and went after it without hesitation. Everybody laughed. I laughed. I thought he was talking about me. 2 years into the marriage, Heather came to me with a problem. She was up for promotion to captain, and there was a review board looking at the unit's communications vulnerability assessments. The assessments were weak. She knew they were weak. The contractor who'd produced them was a man named Bob Dreyer who was 3 months from retirement and had stopped caring approximately 2 years before that. Heather needed those assessments to be strong because her promotion package included a letter of commendation that referenced her unit's operational readiness, and operational readiness runs through communications, and communications ran through Bob Dreyer's garbage paperwork. I need someone to fix this, she said. Someone who understands the systems and can produce assessments that will actually hold up under scrutiny. That's my specialty, I said. I know, she said. And she smiled. I worked 60-hour weeks for 6 weeks. I rebuilt the vulnerability assessments from the ground up. Real work. Deep work. The kind of analysis that doesn't just describe a problem but traces it to its source and proposes 3 independent solutions with resource projections for each. I did it because I loved her, and because she asked, and because I was genuinely good at it. Heather made captain. And then something shifted, quietly, the way things shift in a marriage before you have language for what's changing. She didn't ask me to stop. She just started asking me to do more. Over the next 12 years, I produced or substantially revised every major operational readiness assessment, communications infrastructure report, and technological capability brief that went into Heather's promotion packages. Captain to major, major to lieutenant colonel to colonel. Each promotion came with a paper trail, and I was the one who built the trail. I never put my name on any of it. I didn't want to. These were internal military documents, and I was a civilian contractor without clearance for most of what she shared with me unofficially. So I worked in the background. I was the ghost in the machine, the men behind the colonel. 3 months ago, I was named among the founding partners of Sentinel Ridge Group, a private defense consulting firm that I had co-founded with 2 former colleagues 7 years prior. We had kept the firm quiet while it grew, deliberate strategy, and when we went public with our partnership structure and client list in August, the announcement made noise in the defense contracting world. Heather saw the announcement. She saw my name, my title, the list of government contracts we held, the clearances our firm operated under. And something in her calculation changed. I know it changed because she went cold in a way that was different from the usual coldness, more deliberate, more administrative, like she was reclassifying me from asset to liability. 6 weeks after the announcement, I pulled the amended birth certificate out of a government envelope in my driveway. I am not going to pretend I understood it immediately, but I understood enough. She was cutting me out. Not just emotionally, not just maritally, officially, legally, on paper. in a government document that established the existence and parentage of my daughter. She was severing the record, and the moment I understood that, something happened in my chest that I can only describe as the moment before a storm. Not the storm itself, the stillness before it, the absolute, crystalline clarity that comes when grief burns off and what's underneath it is cold and permanent. I walked to my office. I sat down. I opened my laptop. I made a list. The first person I called was my attorney, Dale Whitfield, who had handled the legal work when Sentinel Ridge Group was incorporated and who knew both my professional history and my marriage in enough detail to understand why I was calling him at 7:30 in the morning. She filed for an amended birth certificate without your signature, Dale said. Without my knowledge. There was a pause. How? That's my first question. What Dale found over the next 72 hours was methodical and enraging in equal measure. Heather had filed a voluntary acknowledgement amendment using a legal provision designed to correct clerical errors or update parentage information in cases where paternity had been formally disputed. She had used a statute designed for a completely different purpose and threaded it through a clerk's office that didn't cross-reference marriage records because it was in a different county than our residence. It wasn't fraud in the crude sense. It was bureaucratic precision deployed in bad faith. She knew exactly what she was doing, Dale said. Yes, I said. She usually does. 3 years ago, I worked 12-hour days for 4 straight months so we could afford to relocate from Virginia to Colorado when Heather's new assignment came through. I turned down a contract worth $340,000 because the travel requirements would have kept me away from Emma during the same period. I told Heather about the contract I'd turned down. She said, "That's very mature of you," and she went back to reading her briefing documents. I kept thinking about that, about the way she'd said it. Not grateful, evaluating, scoring me on a rubric I hadn't known I was being measured against. That was only what I could see. What I couldn't see yet was going to be so much worse. Dale filed for an emergency injunction to halt any further modifications to Emma's birth record and simultaneously opened a paternity establishment action that would, as a legal matter, force a formal hearing at which I could present DNA evidence. Emma was my biological daughter. There was no question. But Heather had found a seam in the administrative process and slipped through it, and now we had to climb back in through the front door. The same people who had watched Heather accept her colonel's eagles at the promotion ceremony, her commanding general, her peers, the staff officers who had read the assessments and reports I had written, would stand there and watch what happened next. I told Dale to file everything. Then I went home and made Emma breakfast. She wanted scrambled eggs with cheese and toast cut into triangles, which is what she'd wanted every Saturday morning since she was 4. I made it exactly right. She sat at the kitchen island and told me about a book she was reading about horses, and I listened, and I watched her face, and I did not let her see one thing that was happening behind my eyes. Heather came downstairs at 9, in uniform, already carrying her briefing bag, and said she was going into the office and would be back after dinner. She looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for weeks, the look I now understood as the look of a woman managing her exposure, keeping the variables in the container until she was ready to move. "Have a good day," I said. She left. Emma looked up from her toast. "Is Mom working this weekend again?" "Yeah, bug. She's always working." "I know." Emma went back to her book. I stood at the sink and looked out the window at the driveway where I had stood 4 days ago holding a document that erased me, and I thought about everything I had built and everything I had given and every hour I had spent in the background making someone else's career look like a monument. Then I thought about what I had not yet shown anyone. I had one more card. I was saving it for when it would hurt the most. My colleague at Sentinel Ridge Group was a man named Carter Flynn, who had spent 11 years in military intelligence before transitioning to private consulting and who had, in his previous life, been very good at finding things that people had tried to make unfindable. I brought Carter into my confidence on a Thursday evening, over coffee in the back corner of a diner 12 miles from the base. I told him everything. The birth certificate, the legal filing, the 12 years of work I had produced for Heather's promotion packages. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always valued about Carter. He let the full shape of a situation appear before he started asking questions. When I finished, he set his cup down and said, "You need to know if there's someone else." "Yes." "And you need documentation." "Yes." He nodded once. "Give me 2 weeks." What Carter found in 12 days was this: a lieutenant colonel named Brett Hagan, who had been assigned to the same command as Heather for the past 18 months, and who had been using a private email address and a messaging application to communicate with my wife approximately 40 times per week for the last 11 of those months. Carter obtained this through entirely legal means: digital footprints, public records, a cell carrier data request that he was licensed to make through our firm's security consulting credentials. He handed me a folder on a Friday afternoon. I opened it at my desk. I went through every page. 11 months. Approximately 1,760 separate communications. The content that Carter had been able to access through metadata and linked accounts confirmed the nature of the relationship without ambiguity. There was a date in the folder that I kept returning to. A date 11 months ago that corresponded to a weekend I had been in Washington for a client meeting, when Emma had stayed at Heather's mother's house, when Heather had told me she'd attended a mandatory training exercise that ran through Sunday. I thought about the Sunday she said she was at a training exercise. I thought about the Monday she came home and said she was tired. I thought about the Tuesday I'd made her coffee and she'd thanked me with the exact same tone she used when thanking a subordinate for a report. 3 years. She had been living a parallel life, and she had been so good at it, so operationally precise, that I had looked directly at it for almost a year and seen nothing. I did not rage. I had moved past rage somewhere in the first 48 hours after the driveway. What I felt now was cold and structural, the feeling of a man who has finished drawing the map and is now ready to move. I called Dale. "File the divorce petition," I said, "and I want a forensic financial review of every joint account going back 7 years. Already on my list," Dale said. "And I want a subpoena for her military personnel file." A pause. "That's a narrower path." "I know a narrower path than that," I said. I hadn't told Dale about the assessments yet, about the 12 years of work, about the promotion packages, about the fact that every piece of professional documentation that had taken Heather Calloway from captain to colonel existed because I had produced it. I hadn't told Dale yet because I needed to understand something first. I needed to understand exactly how deep the documentation ran, how traceable it was, and what the legal and professional implications were for both of us if it came into the open. I spent a weekend going through 12 years of files. I had kept everything, not out of suspicion, not even out of deliberate caution, but because I am a professional and professionals document their work. Every draft, every revision, every email exchange where Heather sent me a brief and I sent back a complete restructured version. Every file had a metadata trail that showed creation on my personal computer, modification timestamps, document properties bearing my name. 12 years of original work, every promotion, every commendation package, every operational readiness brief that had gone before a board with Heather's name on the cover and my fingerprints on every word. I built a binder. I had it professionally organized by a paralegal service Dale recommended, dated, cross-referenced. Each document in the binder matched to the specific promotion or commendation it had supported. The binder was 4 inches thick. I held it in both hands and thought about 12 years of Saturdays, of late nights, of turning down contracts, of making scrambled eggs and trying to be a good husband to a woman who had been running a parallel calculation the entire time. I still hadn't played my final card. I was saving that for when it would hurt the most. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday, 19 days after I'd found the birth certificate. I knew she would be home by 6 because she had a standing calendar block, dinner with Emma on weeknights, one of the few consistent things she maintained, and even a woman running a parallel life needs the appearance of the primary one to hold. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she came in. Emma was at her grandmother's, my mother's house, 2 miles away. I had arranged it that morning without telling Heather, which meant she walked into a house she expected to find full of domestic routine and found instead me, a table, and a manila folder. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. She was still in uniform, her briefcase over one shoulder, and she read the room with the trained efficiency of a military officer before she said anything. "Where's Emma?" "With my mother," I said. "Sit down, Heather." She did not sit down. "What's going on?" I opened the folder and slid the amended birth certificate across the table. She looked at it. Her expression did not change. That told me everything. Not a flicker of surprise. Not the reflexive confusion of someone who didn't know what they were looking at. She looked at it with the expression of a woman looking at a report she'd already reviewed. "You know what that is," I said. "Jack, you know exactly what that is because you filed it. Explain it to me." She set her briefcase down. She walked to the other side of the table but did not sit. Standing was a power position. She was still trying to manage this. "I filed an amendment," she said. "Why?" A pause. "I was protecting Emma's record." "From what?" "From her father's name. From complications." "What complications?" Another pause, longer this time. "You're a defense contractor, Jack. The security exposure." "Stop." I said it flat and final. "Don't use Emma as a cover story. The security exposure argument requires a documented threat assessment, a legal consultation, and my consent. You did none of those things. You did this alone, without telling me, and you did it 6 weeks after Sentinel Ridge went public." She said nothing. "You did it because you wanted my name off that document before you moved forward with whatever you're planning." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something unguarded cross her face, not remorse, but reassessment. She was updating her model. "I want to know how long," I said. "How long what?" I took out the second document. The summary Carter had prepared, contact frequency, dates, duration. I did not put it on the table. I held it where she could see it. She went completely still. "Brett Hagan," I said. 11 months of communication. Approximately 40 contacts per week. The weekend of October 8th, when Emma was at your mother's and I was in Washington, you told me you had a mandatory training exercise. You did not have a mandatory training exercise. The stillness held for 3 seconds and then broke. She pulled out the chair and sat. The standing posture was gone. She put both hands flat on the table and she looked at them. How did you? It doesn't matter how. I sat down across from her. I need you to understand that I have documentation of the relationship. I have documentation of the birth certificate manipulation. And I have documentation of 12 years of work that I produced for you, assessments, briefs, promotion packages, every piece of professional writing that went into your career advancement from captain to colonel. 12 years of files, Heather, time-stamped on my computer, with revision histories and draft chains and emails where you sent me a brief and I sent you back a report. She looked up. I haven't decided yet what to do with that last part, I said, but I want you to know it exists. And I want you to know that I know what you did, all of what you did, and that there is nothing left to manage here. She tried. She tried the way people try when they realize the ground has already shifted and they're still attempting to find purchase. The relationship with Brett, I'm not interested in an explanation. Jack, if you would let me, I'm going to ask you one question, I said. Were you planning to file for divorce after you moved Emma's birth certificate, so that I'd have a harder time establishing parental rights in the proceedings? A pause that was 3 seconds too long. That's what I thought, I said. I closed the folder. Dale Whitfield filed our divorce petition this morning. You'll receive the paperwork tonight. She stared at the folder. I want joint custody of Emma, I said. Shared physical custody, no restrictions. I want my name restored on her birth certificate through the court order, which Dale's filing initiates. I want a forensic financial review of our joint accounts. And I want you to understand that if any of those things become contested, I will introduce the promotion package documentation into the relevant proceedings. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. What does that mean for my career? I don't know yet, I said. That depends on what happens next. I stood up. I put the folder under my arm. But there's one more person I need to deal with, I said. Someone who knew things and made choices that made this worse. I'll handle that separately. She looked up at me. Ooh, I walked out of the kitchen. I did not look back. The forensic financial review took 3 weeks and produced a finding that was both expected and stunning in its specificity. Heather had, over the previous 14 months, moved $63,000 out of our joint savings account in increments carefully sized to avoid triggering automatic bank reporting thresholds. The money had gone into a personal account held solely in her name at a different institution. Dale put the document in front of me on a Monday morning. He was a careful man, not given to dramatic statements, but he let himself say, "This is methodical." Yes, I said. She was building a runway. For a clean exit, I said. She wanted to be financially separated, have Emma's documentation cleaned up, and then file first. She was about 6 weeks from doing it. $63,000. I thought about the overtime hours, about the contract I'd turned down, about 17 years of building something together that she had been quietly dismantling on a 14-month timetable. Each number in the financial report was worse than the one before it. The earliest transfer was dated 1 week after Sentinel Ridge Group's public announcement. That was the trigger. The moment she saw what I was actually worth professionally, she started building the exit. I heard Carter's voice in my head, from a conversation we'd had a week earlier. You represented something different to her when you were just the background contractor. The moment you had a public profile and a firm with government contracts, you changed the calculus. How so? A powerful husband is an asset. An equally powerful husband with his own public profile is a complication. She couldn't control the narrative anymore. The same week the financial report came back, something else arrived. An email from a woman named Patricia Lennox, the senior personnel specialist in the Army's Human Resources Command Division, who had been contacted by Dale's office in connection with our subpoena request for Heather's personnel file. The email was professional and brief, but it contained one line that I had to read twice. Please be advised that we have also received a separate inquiry regarding documentation authenticity on the subject's promotional history from the Inspector General's office. I called Dale immediately. Did you contact the IG? I said. No, he said. That came from somewhere else. I had an idea where it came from. 2 months prior, I had attended a quarterly meeting of Sentinel Ridge's advisory board, which included a retired 2-star general named Walter Briggs who had spent 35 years in the Army and who had an opinion about documentation integrity that could accurately be described as religious. I had mentioned to Walter, in a private conversation after the meeting, that I had produced substantial professional work that had advanced a military officer's career without credit or disclosure. I had not mentioned Heather's name. I had framed it as a hypothetical, a question about professional ethics and documentation disclosure in the defense contracting world. Walter had listened carefully. He had asked several clarifying questions. He had said, very precisely, if that were documented and traceable, it would be the kind of thing that an inspector general would need to know about. I had said, I understand. I had not called Walter again. I had not needed to. Walter Briggs had made his own assessment, his own decision. An independent domino had fallen without me touching it. The IG inquiry was now on the record. I had not caused it directly. I had simply told the truth to someone who had the judgment and the position to act on it, and he had done what he believed was right. That morning, Heather's attorney, a man named Philip Garrett who had a reputation for aggressive posturing in high-net-worth divorces, called Dale's office to request a negotiation meeting. What changed? Dale asked me. She found out about the IG inquiry, I said. How do you want to proceed? Tell Philip we'll meet, I said, next week. And tell him to come with settlement terms that assume I have the full documentation package, because I do. I still had one thing I hadn't used. The binder was sitting in a fireproof safe in my office. Carter had made a digital backup on an encrypted drive. The IG inquiry was running independently. The financial forensics were documented. The birth certificate manipulation was in front of a family court judge. The ace card was still in my hand, and I had decided exactly when to play it. Philip Garrett came to Dale's office with what he characterized as a comprehensive framework for resolution. It was a framework designed for a man with less documentation than I had. Joint custody contingent on restrictions. Financial division tilted toward Heather's higher income. A non-disclosure agreement covering, in language so broad it was nearly satirical, any professional or collaborative activities undertaken during the marriage. The non-disclosure agreement was the tell. It confirmed that Heather knew exactly what the binder contained and was trying to put a legal wall around it before the IG inquiry could build momentum. Dale looked at the framework across the table and then looked at Philip Garrett with the particular expression of a man who has been doing this long enough to recognize an opening bid that was designed to insult. My client will need to review this, Dale said. We'll respond in 5 business days. After Philip left, Dale turned to me. She's scared. She should be. What do you want to do with the promotion documentation? This was the moment I'd been building to. Not the moment I'd acted, that had been weeks of quiet, methodical work, but the moment of decision about the final piece. I want to submit the documentation package to the IG inquiry, I said. Not as a divorce leverage tactic, as a formal document disclosure to an active investigation. Through proper channels, with a cover letter from our firm that contextualizes my professional role and the work product's provenance. Dale was quiet for a moment. You understand what that does to her career? Yes. Potentially her retirement. Yes. You're sure? I thought about Emma's birth certificate. I thought about $63,000 moved in increments designed to avoid detection. I thought about 11 months and 1,760 communications. I thought about 17 years and every Saturday and every contract I'd turned down and every hour in the background making someone else's record look like a monument. She made her choices methodically and in advance, I said. She had a plan. She worked the plan. I'm not going to pretend there was passion or confusion involved. This was strategic. My response to strategy is strategy. Okay, Dale said, but I want it submitted the right way. I'm not filing it in anger. I'm filing it because it's the truth, it's documented, and an active government investigation has standing to receive it. Dale submitted the documentation package to the Inspector General's office 8 days later. The cover letter described my professional background, my relationship to the documents, and the method by which their provenance could be verified. We attached the metadata reports, the revision histories, the email chains. The binder arrived at the IG's office on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Heather's command had been notified that she was the subject of an active IG investigation. By the following Monday, she had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's preliminary findings. I heard this from Carter, not from Heather. Carter heard it from a contact at the base. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. I heard she looked terrible the day she left her office for the last time before the administrative leave began. I did not check. The surprise came from a direction I hadn't expected. 3 weeks into the IG investigation, I received a call from Patricia Lennox at Human Resources Command. She was professional, as before, but her tone had shifted, less bureaucratic, more careful. Mr. Calloway, she said, I need to inform you that as part of the investigation's review of the documentation you submitted, some questions have arisen about the nature of your access to certain information that was used in the documents you produced. I sat up straight. What kind of questions? Some of the communications infrastructure vulnerability data contained in the assessments you produced appears to have included information that, at the time it was provided to you, was classified at a level your civilian clearance did not extend to. A cold feeling moved through me that had nothing to do with anger. This was different. I didn't have access to classified data, I said. I worked from briefs that Heather provided me. Yes, Patricia said carefully. And that's the issue. The question isn't about your clearance. It's about how the information reached you in the first place. I understood it then, fully, and in one piece. Heather had shared information with me that she may not have had authorization to share. I had produced work product from it without knowing its classification level. The IG inquiry, which had expanded as IG inquiries do, had found the seam and was now pulling on both threads simultaneously. I needed to get in front of this. I called Dale, then Carter, then our firm's legal counsel at Sentinel Ridge. Within 48 hours, I had retained a separate attorney who specialized in federal national security law, a man named George Pemberton who had spent 14 years as a JAG officer and who had, Carter told me, never lost a client to a classification-related prosecution. Tell me everything, George said. From the beginning, I told him everything. His assessment, delivered 2 days later over a conference call, was direct. You are not the target here. You received documents from your spouse in a domestic context, produced derivative work without knowledge of the classification status, and have cooperated fully and proactively with the investigation. Your exposure is minimal if you continue cooperating and are completely transparent. What about Sentinel Ridge? I asked. Your firm's current contracts are under separate clearances and separate review. The classification issue, if it becomes an issue, is isolated to the historical documents. Your firm's standing is not at risk. I exhaled. But, George added, the person who shared the classified information with you, whether knowingly or through negligence, is in a significantly more complicated position. That was the complication I had not anticipated, the obstacle that appeared between me and the resolution I'd been working toward. I spent 3 days working with George and Dale to navigate it, producing a full account of every document, every interaction, every context in which Heather had shared materials with me, with absolute clarity about what I knew and when. It was the most exhausting 3 days of the entire process. But I got through it with my position intact, my firm's standing secure, and the factual record as clean and complete as I could make it. The obstacle, when I hit it, required me to show exactly who I was. And I had documentation for that too. The divorce settlement was reached 6 weeks after the IG investigation began. Philip Garrett came back to the table with a framework that bore no resemblance to his first attempt. Heather's administrative leave had consequences that ran immediately through her financial position, the separation of allowances, the housing questions, the retirement calculation uncertainties. She was no longer negotiating from the position of an active duty colonel with a rising trajectory. She was negotiating from the position of a woman under investigation with an uncertain professional future. The terms we reached were these: full joint legal custody of Emma with shared physical custody, primary residence with me during the school year based on stability of schedule. My name restored on Emma's birth certificate through the court order, with Heather's voluntary non-opposition. Full forensic accounting of the $63,000 with repayment to the marital estate before division. No non-disclosure agreement covering any of my professional work. The house in Colorado to be sold with proceeds split equally. I signed the agreement on a Friday afternoon in Dale's office. It was a clean room, quiet, with afternoon light coming through the windows. Dale put the signature pages in front of me one at a time and I signed each one carefully, reading every line. When it was done, Dale said, "You handled this well." "I had good help," I said. "No, you handled it well. Most people in this situation, the birth certificate, the financial moves, all of it, most people lose control of the process. You didn't." I thought about the 4 minutes in the driveway in November, about Emma's pink curtain, about what it felt like to have your name removed from the record of your own child's existence. I didn't have the option of losing control, I said. There was too much at stake. The final encounter was not something I planned. It happened 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, in the parking lot of Emma's school, during a pickup where we'd both arrived at the same time. Heather was there first. I saw her when I turned in from the street, standing by her car, not in uniform, in civilian clothes that seemed to hang differently than they used to. She'd lost weight. Her posture was still military straight from years of habit, but something underneath it had gone out, the way a building looks structurally intact but you can tell the foundation has shifted. She saw me. She didn't move toward me and she didn't move away. She waited. I parked and walked across the lot. I stopped a few feet from her. "Jack," she said. The way she said my name was different from any way she'd said it in recent memory. Not managing, not calculating, just the word, Heather. She looked at me for a moment. 2 other parents walked past us toward the school entrance. She waited until they were past. "I wanted to say something," she said. "Okay." She pressed her lips together. She was working to hold the professional composure, and it was costing her. "The IG investigation is going to conclude next month," she said. "They're recommending a reduction in rank and a formal letter of reprimand. My retirement package is reduced. I'll lose the pension increment I'd have gotten with another 2 years." "I know," I said. "I know you know." She paused. "I'm not telling you to make you feel something. I'm telling you because I want to say that I understand why you submitted the documentation. I understand it was accurate. I understand that you had grounds." She stopped. "I gave up a lot for you," I said. It came out quieter than I expected. Not angry, just true. "I know you did. Not just contracts and money. 12 years of professional work that had my fingerprints on it and your name on the cover. I did that because I believed we were building something together. And you used it and then tried to cut me out of the record like I was a liability." She said nothing. "And then Emma's birth certificate." I stopped because my voice had started doing something I didn't want it to do. That was the part one can't make sense of. Removing a father from his daughter's record. That wasn't strategy. That was something else. She looked at the ground for a moment. When she looked back up, her eyes were wet, which was something I had seen exactly twice in 17 years. I had convinced myself, she said slowly, that I was protecting her. That if our marriage was ending, if there were going to be proceedings and complications, that a clean record was better for her. I told myself a story about it. Was it true? A long pause. No, she said. I was protecting myself. I was afraid of what would come out and I wanted to control as many variables as I could in advance. Emma was she was a variable I could reach. She looked directly at me then. Not managing. Not calculating. She has your eyes, Heather said. She has your steadiness. The way she solves problems, that's from you. I know what she's losing by not having you in her daily life the way it used to be, and that's on me. I looked at her. I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I'm not asking you to reopen anything or consider anything. I know the door is closed and I know I closed it. I wanted to say it. To your face. That I am sorry. For the birth certificate especially. That was wrong in a way that the other things weren't. The other parents were starting to come out of the school now, children streaming through the double doors. I know you're sorry, I said. And I know you mean it right now. But being sorry doesn't reopen things. You were deliberate, Heather. You had a plan and you worked it. I don't have bitterness about it. I made my own choices in response. But I'm not able to look at sorry and see something that changes the door. She nodded once. She understood the language of finality. She'd always been good at reading a briefing. Emma came through the doors then, backpack bouncing, and she saw us both standing together and for a second her face did the thing children's faces do when they don't know whether to be hopeful or cautious. I smiled at her and held out my hand and she ran to me, and I picked her up even though she was 8 and technically too old for it, and she wrapped her arms around my neck and said, "You're both here. For pickup." "Yeah," I said. "We're both here for pickup." "Cool," she said. Kids adapt faster than adults to the new shape of things, when the new shape comes with consistency and love on both sides. Heather looked at Emma with an expression I recognized from the earliest years of our marriage, before the calculations started, before the career architecture took over the primary space, and she said, "Hi, Bug." Emma said, "Hi, Mom," and reached over and briefly touched Heather's arm, the way she'd started doing, that small bridging gesture that children invent when they're trying to hold two worlds in their hands at once. I set Emma down. I said, "Your mom's going to drop you off Sunday at 6. Emma said okay and ran ahead to my truck. I looked back at Heather. She was watching Emma go. She looked reduced and real in a way that the uniform and the rank and the 13 years of managed appearances had never allowed. "Take care of yourself," I said. I meant it. She looked at me. "You too." I walked to my truck. I did not look back. 14 months later, Carter and I rang in the new year at Sentinel Ridge's annual partner dinner, a small affair at a restaurant in downtown Denver that we'd been holding since the firm's third year when we finally had enough partners to call it a tradition. There were 8 of us around the table now. We'd added 2 new senior analysts in the fall. Our government contract portfolio had expanded by 40% in the previous fiscal year, and we had 3 proposal cycles running simultaneously for new work that, if it came through, would require us to double our staffing. I gave a short toast. I thanked the team for the year. I said something about the work being the point, not the recognition, which everyone around the table understood because we'd all chosen this industry knowing that a great deal of what we did would never have our names on it. That was the nature of the work. I had made peace with the unnamed work a long time ago. The difference now was that I knew where I stood. I knew what I'd built and what it was worth and whose hands it was in. Emma was with my mother that night. She had started a drawing class on Saturday mornings and had been producing portraits of horses with a level of commitment that I found genuinely impressive. She left her drawings on the kitchen table and I photographed each one. My sister, who lived in Portland, had framed 2 of them and put them on her wall. The custody schedule had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural now. Sunday through Wednesday with me, Thursday through Saturday with Heather, alternating holidays. Emma moved between us with the pragmatic efficiency of an 8-year-old who had decided that 2 homes with 2 parents who both showed up was fine, actually, and could she please have the drawing class on Saturdays regardless of which parent was on schedule. She could, and she did. Heather had been assigned to an administrative role pending resolution of the IG matter. The rank reduction had been formally processed. She was a lieutenant colonel again, which carried its own complications given that she'd hold that rank alongside officers who had known her as a colonel. She had requested a transfer, which had been granted. She was in Virginia now. I heard this from Emma, who said, "Mom's new base has a big gym." I heard she had ended her involvement with Brett Hagan within weeks of the divorce proceedings becoming serious. I heard this from Carter, who heard it from his contact network. I did not verify it and I did not particularly need to. She was not a villain in the story I told myself anymore. She was a person who had made a series of decisions that were precise and self-interested and ultimately self-destructive, and who was now living with the architecture of those decisions the way you live with a house you built badly. The structure is still standing, but every room has a problem. My name was on Emma's birth certificate. The court order had processed 6 weeks after the divorce petition was filed, and the amended amendment, the restoration, had come back from the Vital Records office on a Tuesday, which I found had a particular symmetry. I put it in the fireproof safe next to the empty space where the binder used to be. My life had a quality of space in it now that I was still learning to inhabit. Quiet mornings when Emma wasn't with me. Long runs in the early hours before the workday. A book on the nightstand that I actually finished. Saturday afternoons that belonged entirely to me and involved nothing more complicated than deciding where to have lunch. I had started spending time with a woman named Laura, a structural engineer who consulted with the city's transportation authority and who had opinions about bridge design that she delivered with a directness I found refreshing. We were careful with each other, which was the right approach. She knew about Emma, about the divorce, about the broad shape of the last 2 years. She didn't need the details. She was interested in where I was going, not where I'd been, which turned out to be exactly the posture I needed from someone new. We were not rushed. The contrast with the urgency of 17 years ago, with falling hard and fast and without a plan for the landing, was something I thought about and was grateful for. I was different now, more settled in my own outline. 3 weeks after the partner dinner, I was in my office on a Thursday evening when my phone lit up with a message from Carter. Hagen's out, it said. Resigned in lieu of investigation. Connected to same IG matter. I looked at the message for a moment. Brett Hagen's situation had been an open thread, one of the last loops in the architecture of what had happened, the accomplice whose role had been noted and documented and handed to the investigation to handle on its own schedule. I hadn't done anything specific to Hagen, but the investigation had expanded the way investigations do when the original thread is well documented, and the expansion had found him. He was out of the army. The career was done. I put my phone down and looked at the window, the Denver skyline lit in the dark, and I let myself sit with the feeling for a moment. It was not triumph. It was not satisfaction in any dramatic sense. It was the feeling of a thing completed, of a process that had begun in a driveway in November and moved through its own logic to the end of itself. Everything I had planted had paid off. Every open loop had closed. The birth certificate, the financial accounts, the promotion documentation, the IG inquiry, the divorce settlement, the custody arrangement, the final exchange in the school parking lot. Every element had been set up and every element had been delivered. I thought about Emma's drawings of horses on my kitchen table. I thought about Laura's directness and the book on my nightstand. I thought about Carter across the partner dinner table, and Dale filing papers with the precision of a craftsman, and George Pemberton's steady voice on a conference call telling me my exposure was minimal because I had been truthful. I thought about Walter Briggs, who had heard me describe a situation in hypothetical terms and had made his own judgment call with the authority and integrity of a man who had spent 35 years believing that documentation should mean something. I had not done this alone. I had done it with people who showed up when I called them and who brought their full capability to what I needed. That was worth something to name. I opened my laptop. I had a proposal draft to review, a capabilities brief for a new contract cycle that one of our